afternoon. And happy 125th anniversary to the Village of Kewaskum. Or maybe I should say 127th, but who's counting? Details. Thank you very, very much for coming today. We have two very special guests with us. First of all, my name is Ann Troutner. I'm a volunteer with the Kewaskum Historical Society, and I'm very, very excited to have our two guests with us. All three of us are really nervous to be sitting up here. And I talked them into coming, and I said, oh, we might have a couple of people, and we were going to meet in a little room. We thought maybe 30 people, and so we're just going to have a fireside chat, and there's nothing to be worried about. So I'm wondering if you two could both introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, Kewaskum. Before I introduce myself, how's that? Okay, how's that? Thank you. Good afternoon, Kewaskum. Introduce myself and tell you about myself. I want to just give a shout out to both Ann Troutner and Aaron Latch, because without them we would not be here. We did not know there was and when we decided to come here, we were talking about where we're going to stay, and Aaron and the Historical Society took care of everything, and we are staying with the Cochrans, Sally and Chris, and their beautiful bed and breakfast in Serenity. So thank you to you guys for hosting us. It is beautiful. If you get the chance to go there, you must see it. It's gorgeous. Beautiful home. So thank you to them. Breakfast too. We got here Thursday and started driving around. We saw that there was a farmer's market, but they were already closing up. But Friday we got out and about and went down to the event. Everybody that we have talked with and met just in passing has been so receptive of our visit and so welcoming. We are very overwhelmed by the response and the reception. So it's really felt like this is a hometown, and I really appreciate it. And I know Joy does too. I speak for both of us on that. So thank you so much for the warm welcome.
Where you're from?
Absolutely. So my name is Val Scrivener. I was born in 1962, so I just turned 60 in January. I am married to Sean. Been married to Sean for 21 years. We live in Midwest City, which is just outside of Oklahoma City. And we didn't ever have any kids, but we do have two cats, Wiley and Winnie, and we raise some freshwater fish. So we've got 6 fish in our tank. And we just had a new baby in our tank, so we've got some parents. Both Sean and I are federal employees. I've been a civil servant for 37 years, and we both work for the Department of Defense. The agency that we work for is the Defense Information Systems Agency. So if you're curious and want to Google it, you will see that our agency is actually a combat support agency, and we provide direct support to the warfighter. So it's really something impressive that we do in support of the warfighter and sometimes the President of the United States. So the building that we work in is actually on Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. So we live right outside of the base, and that's where we make our home. In my free time, I do like to frequent thrift stores, so we've already hit the Goodwill down in Westwood. I also am a really big true crime buff, so I spend a lot of time watching Dateline and Forensic Files, things like that. But just a fun fact for anybody that is a thrifter, my best find is a Le Creuset Dutch oven that I got for $12. And the guy had it in his hand at the Salvation Army, and was putting it on the shelf, and I pretty much just took it out of his hand. So thank you again, and I will let my sister introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good. I don't want to have to raise my voice higher. I'm just teasing. I'm Joey Lascano. Grew up in Oklahoma, but I moved to Boston, Massachusetts about 11 years ago. I currently work for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts in the corporate citizenship department. So our department actually, we're the face of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. So we're out in the community a lot, supporting nonprofit organizations across the state. I have two girls, Tara, who is 38, and Megan, who's 25. Yes, I had to take notes. Sorry about that, girls. Glad they're not here. My fun fact, I told my sister, that my fun fact was going to be that approximately 3 years ago, I was sitting at my office at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and my phone rings, and it was Ann. But you guys already know that. So when COVID hit, I have always loved plants. But my fun fact is that I'm a plant mom. So I actually have, I don't even know how many plants I have, but it takes hours to water all the plants that I have in my house. So Sally, you would probably appreciate that. I did say this the other day when we were practicing too. I said I was going to mention that I'm single. So if there's but you have to move to Boston.
So anyway, I've been talking with Joey and Val for a while now, and I'm just so glad you're here, so thank you. So I thought I would start out by telling a little bit about Chief Kewaskum, because that's what I'm here to talk about. And the first people who lived in this area were Potawatomi people, for the most part. At the time that the first European settlers arrived here. And of course, everyone knows that, they were driven out. There was a treaty back in 1833, the Treaty of Chicago, and they had 3 years to remove all of the Native Americans from the area from that time. Some of the people still stayed here. Chief Kewaskum, we believe, was one of them that did. Most, though, were removed to a reservation in Oklahoma or Kansas by 1888. I moved to Kewaskum about 7 years ago, and I had, I had never heard of Kewaskum, Wisconsin until I came here, and so I was very curious, what does Kewaskum mean? Who is it named after? One of the first people I met was Steve Baker. He was our head of the library here at the Kewaskum Public Library, and he had done a lot of research about Chief Kewaskum. So I wanted to do a shout out to Steve. He wasn't able to be here today, but I was very curious, and he told me what he had known, and then of course when Aaron had this idea to work on a book, and I got involved with that, I became a lot more interested in who Chief Kewaskum was. So there actually is quite a bit written about him. There's a lot of stories. We don't know for sure how much of it is fact and how much is stories, but we do know that in most places it says that he was a Potawatomi Indian chief, because the Potawatomi lived in this area. That makes sense. There are a lot of stories about that he was a skilled hunter, and of course he made friends with a lot of the European settlers. Enough so that they decided to name the town and village after him. Chief Kewaskum, we believe, lived in the Kewaskum area, but he lived all around this whole area. The Potawatomi people would travel during the summertime. They would go to places where there was water typically. They would have large communities. They lived in either wigwams or like rectangular homes, and they would make camp where the water was, and they would farm the area, grow plants and such. And during the winter, they would move to the woods where hopefully it's a little bit warmer in the Wisconsin winters, and they would hunt. So there's a lot of stories, and we'll see on the map, he went down, lived in Jefferson County as far as Lake Kewaskum, and up as far as Leroy in Dodge County. There's a lot of stories that have been told about Chief Kewaskum. And the writing on here is really small, so don't worry about reading it. You have to visit our museum or read the book, and you'll get all the stories. But there's stories that Chief Kewaskum lived on a hill in Kewaskum. It's possible that it was on the hill at River Hill Park, where we just had our big celebration. But there's also a lot of other hills inside of Kewaskum and around Kewaskum, so we're not sure if he actually lived on one of those hills. I like to think that he did. But there's another story that he would come up the river on a canoe and get flour from the area and then go back on the river. Some stories are about Chief Kewaskum living near Colesville, where I know some of you are from. And he made friends with Frederick Cole, in how Colesville got its name. And there's stories of him hunting there. We also know that he became friends with a Swedish immigrant who settled by Pine Lake. And the man's name was Gustav Unonius. And they became very good friends. He wrote a lot about Chief Kewaskum, and actually, I think, saved his life a couple times. He wrote about what a great hunter he was. And I had mentioned earlier that he lived in Leroy in Dodge County, and where they settled there was probably the largest, one of the largest Potawatomi settlements in the area at the time. So as I was trying to find out more about Chief Kewaskum, what makes a person a little bit more real is when they have family. And I was very curious about who Chief Kewaskum's family was. And we did find, Aaron and I, during all of our research, found that Chief Kewaskum had a son named John. By the year 1843, he would have been grown, so as an adult. So I'm not sure what year Chief Kewaskum was born, but I'm thinking somewhere early 1800s. There's a story that Chief Kewaskum had a couple of grandchildren who were buried in the Reeseville Cemetery in Dodge County. And also he had a wife, or a squaw, who supposedly was buried at Lake Kewaskum in 1893. The person who wrote that thought that the year might be off. They thought it was probably earlier, but that's down in Jefferson County. And some of these stories, people have asked, well, why don't you know a little bit more, and can't you tell us more details? But the problem is that, first of all, there are a couple things. The people spoke the Algonquin language, so they didn't speak the same language as the European settlers who are out here. A lot of them spoke German, so it seems like it'd be hard to communicate. And they didn't write things down. And they did not have the same years. They didn't keep track of years the way that we do. So a lot of it is kind of guesses. And there are a lot of stories. Chief Kewaskum has kind of captured the attention of everyone around here. And I would have to say everyone I have met really, really admires him. I mean, I've heard people say, oh, are they feeling insulted? Or I think, no, I think everyone I have met is just in awe. I'm thinking that you've noticed. So anyway, there's stories about how Chief Kewaskum died and where he was buried. We don't know exactly which one of these is true. There's a lot of stories. One is that he died in a cabin that he lived in. I don't know that he had a cabin, so I'm not sure how realistic that is, but maybe he did, and maybe it was a wigwam that they called a cabin, I don't know. But anyway, there was a story that he died there, and then he was buried on Barber's Island near Eustis Fort in Dodge County. Another story says that he was killed by a train in 1857, and his body was taken to Barber's Island, which is also the same place, right near Eustis Fort. Another story says that Chief Kewaskum had gone up to a reservation in Minnesota. I've also heard that he went to a reservation up north. And then he came down and drowned in the Eustis Fort Mill Pond and was buried at that same place on that island. So most of the stories seem to think that he was buried on this island. And there's people who dug up the body, and they took the bones, they took the relics and beads that he was buried with, they took his skull, and of course at that time people weren't thinking anything of it. They took them as, proof that, here he is. And, these days we would not do that, but that's what the story is. So that seems to be what probably happened. And that seems to have happened sometime in around 1850. And they dug up his body somewhere around 1860. I've read a couple different years. And then in 1905, in the Kewaskum Statesman, which I know you all read, there was a story that came out in August 5th, 1905. And it said that Chief Kewaskum dead, and that Chief Kewaskum had died on a reservation in Kashina, right near Shawano. And so a lot of people think, well, there it is, now he has died. But people had questions, how could this be Chief Kewaskum if he died somewhere around 1850? And also on the picture in this newspaper article is from a Menominee Indian reservation. So how could this Chief Kewaskum be Menominee if he's Potawatomi, that our Chief Kewaskum is, that Chief Kewaskum is named after? But anyway, we have been able to find out who this person is in the picture, and he is indeed a Chief Kewaskum. His name is Chief Peter Kewaskum. He was a Menominee Indian chief, and he was born in Door County and lived in that area. He did several things around here, and we were able to find out the family lineage. So I talked to a man named Sean Tashner. He lives out in Washington State this weekend. I believe he is moving to another state, or he would have joined us also, but he couldn't. So instead, I asked if he would send a video. So we have a video. This is Sean Tashner, and he, like I said, is related to the man in the picture that ran in the papers. So.
Well, Paso, my name is Sean Teschner. I live out here in Washington State, and I want to thank Ann Troutner for asking me to do a little video about the history of my grandmother's family, coming from the Menominee Reservation in Wisconsin. And my grandma Isabel was born there in 1905. Her mother was Mary Ann Kewaskum Kota, whose father was actually Chief Kewaskum. And my grandmother's father was John Schuster, a U.S. cavalryman who came from Wisconsin and was in the Civil War the last 4 months. And he had married my grandmother's mother, and he had been a cavalry soldier, and he had worn a hat and some boots and a coat, which were later gifted Chief Kewaskum. And it's going to show you a picture of him with his U.S. cavalry boots, pants, coat, and holding my great-grandfather's hat in his hands. And so I want to thank everybody for this opportunity. I had no idea till we had dinner with Grandma, and she used to joke about my grandfather was an Indian chief, and we'd all sit around and laugh. My grandmother loved to tell stories about growing up on the reservation, and we thought she was just teasing us, but It wasn't until after her death when I started to actually discover my roots of who I am and where I came from, that in fact it was true. I was related to Chief Kewaskum. And his wife was Shawanokie, which meant in Chippewa, thunder is coming. And so I'm split tribal. I'm totally a 1/8 Native. I've got 1/16 Menominee, 1/16 Chippewa, but unfortunately the Menominee do not recognize the Chippewa blood in me because that's Canadian, and Menominee is American. So I hope this helps explain a little bit about my history, and I want to welcome you here and thank you for honoring Chief Kewaskum and his wife Shawanokie, for whom Lake Shawano is named. So, Wawanan, that means see you later in Menominee. Bye-bye.
This is the picture that he was talking about. The picture was in the paper. This is Chief Peter Kewaskum. And when we first saw this picture back a couple years ago when we were working on the book, we didn't know what he was wearing. We had read that it was gifted to him, some Civil War outfits, or a Civil War outfit, and that he had received from the state. But I had contacted the state to see if there was any evidence of that, and we couldn't find anything. So Sean's explanation makes sense, that that would have come from his son-in-law. And his son-in-law was from Germantown, Richfield area. So we still wonder though, is there another Chief Kewaskum that would be Potawatomi? Because how are these stories that he had died so much earlier and then this Potawatomi, how would he have ended up on a Menominee Indian reservation 50 years later? Didn't really make a lot of sense. So in our research, we looked up, a lot of things, but one of the things that we did a lot was we used this book, Kewaskum Then and Now, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. A man named Mark Smucker wrote this at the suggestion of his teacher, Dean Rowe. Mark Smucker was a high school student when he worked on this, and he did it for the Kewaskum Historical Society for the bicentennial of the nation. And I believe Dean Rowe is here somewhere. So thank you, Dean. So because of Dean, we have all of this research. We had wanted to talk to Mark Smucker, but unfortunately he passed away in 1979 at the age of 21. He was killed in a car accident on Christmas night. So all we have are Mark Smucker's notes. And for a high school student, he did a real lot of wonderful research. And we found this letter that was written to the United States Department of the Interior. And, this letter was the response. But Mark Smucker had written to the department and asked if they knew of anyone by the name of Kewaskum, because it's the big burning question. We all want to know, who was this man, and does he have any family around? So he received this letter back, and the only person at that time, back in 1975, when he was working on the book, was a girl named Maggie Kewaskum. And she was a student at the Haskell Institute in Kansas. So then I did some more research, and I love Googling things and looking things up. And so I found this online, and it was from a book that was done by the Department of Interior. And there were students at the Haskell Institute, and in this picture is Maggie Kewaskum. She's the second one on the left, and this picture was taken in 1934. This was for a show that they did. It must have been a marionette show with puppets, and Maggie must have been very good at crafts. I think we're going to hear about that in a minute. But this was the scenery that she helped to design. It's how we got our little logo for this presentation, because this is there's sparrows in the center there, and a thunderbird up at the top. So it made me think, well, could Chief Kewaskum's family ended up in Kansas or Oklahoma, that area? And I've done a lot more reading over the last several years as we've all been kind of locked down, and what else is there to do but read about Chief Kewaskum? So back on July 28th, 1851, approximately 600 Potawatomi people were removed from the village of Teresa in Dodge County. And they were forced to go to a reservation in Kansas. Now, Teresa is not very far away from here, and it's in Dodge County, just over the border. And I know of one person that kept living in Dodge County and Washington County, a man by the name of Chief Kewaskum. So is it possible that his family was in this group that was removed? Were some of his children removed? Was he there? I don't know, but it's possible. So it made me really think it's possible. And I wanted to know more about this Maggie Kewaskum and what her story was. So I did a lot of searching on the internet. There's a site, if any of you are interested in ancestry or finding out details about census rules, there's a site called Family Search. It is done by the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints out in Utah. But all of their scanning is actually done at UW-Madison, at the Historical Society that is there, the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I actually visited there. This is the desk that they scan all of these things. I looked up on Family Search, and I was so excited to see this. You have no idea. And I know most people are not, but I can believe that this is where they do all the scanning. It's also the place we're going to be scanning all of the old Kewaskum statesman issues. But this was just incredible to me that it's done right here in Wisconsin. So they have census rolls, they have so much information. So I looked things up. I found all sorts of things about Maggie Kewaskum, her family, and I took pictures of some of the different things that I found. Her grandparents, her sister, her stepmother. I could find everything. And so I didn't take pictures of all of them, but it kept me busy. I also found obituary that was written in a newspaper about John Kewaskum. Sorry. And after finding all those things, that is when I made the call to Joey. When we were doing this research, we had all this information about the family. I just told Joey a couple of days ago all the things I did. I wrote letters, sent them to addresses that I don't think they were probably even real addresses. I don't know. Everything that I could find that said this, the Kewaskum family, I sent out and reached out asking for, do you know anything about Chief Kewaskum? And we're trying to reach you. And so I sent letters. I called phone numbers that I found. None of them were valid phone numbers. We reached out on Facebook. No answer. Nothing. And then I knew that Joey worked through all this searching. It's a little scary how much you can find out about someone, but she works at the Cross Blue Shield in Massachusetts, and I thought, well, I can never even get a hold of my own insurance agent. But I will try and try to reach this Joey out in Massachusetts. And so I called the 1-800 number, and I talked to the operator and said who I was looking for, and she said, oh yeah, please hold. And then a voice came on, and it was Joey, and it was one of the most exciting calls ever, because it was, I couldn't believe it, all that years of looking, and there she was. So, so I'm gonna pass this over to you two now, and you can tell about your family. That it's a Kewaskum family, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Grandma, we knew her by Maggie Kay Stevens. We knew her, we thought her middle name was Kay, but it was actually, she went by her maiden name, Kewaskum. And somewhere the H was introduced into her middle name. But on this next chart that Anne's going to pull up, oh, we've got the, there we go, thank you. So my grandma, our grandma, is pictured in the upper left corner, the upper left of the photograph holding a doll. And that's one of the earliest photographs that I have of her. My mother passed away, or our mother passed away in 2013. And of course, with, removing the personal contents from her home, stumbled across a whole box of photographs. And I just put them aside that many years ago and really didn't look through them until Anne reached out. And so then I kind of started my research. But on this chart,
And I want to say on this one that's showing right now, it says that she was born about 1913, and things that I found said that she was born about 1911, and it's all because we don't know. Like yours are very kind of buried, so hard to know.
difficult to find accurate records because we actually thought she was born in 1910 in October, but it could have been November. We really don't know for certain. But judging from these photographs, Grandma was a very fashionable woman, and a lot of the photographs that I have of her show her in some kind of pose or like she's modeling almost. And kind of to go back over what Anne found, her father was John Kewaskum, who I found was born in about 1884, and he married a woman by the name of Ethel Wapapaw Koa, who was about 17 years old, and her mother, Mary Penetho, in the marriage record that I found, and you have it as well, her mother had to sign to approve her to marry John. They were married in 1906 in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and Joy and I were actually raised in the Shawnee, Tecumseh area. We went to Tecumseh High School, and they had two daughters, Lucy, who had her birth date, but we did not ever hear about Lucy, so don't know if she survived or if she died at a young age, and then our grandmother, Maggie. John passed away, our grandmother was very young, and Ethel married William Whitewater around 1918. So Grandma was probably just still a young child. And he had already had some children, so through the years we grew up to know these children, and we just called them Aunt Dorothy and Uncle George, but we thought they were related, when in fact they were probably Grandma's stepbrothers and sisters. She went to Haskell Institute and entered there about age 15 through about age 25, where she did receive her high school diploma, and then was probably received an equivalent of an associate's degree in arts and crafts. She was very crafty. Just some of the research I did on the Haskell Institute, it was set up to Americanize the Native children, and they taught them, they taught the girls homemaking and cooking and sewing and how to raise a garden, and then they taught the boys, how to be boys and men. So this is where Grandma learned all of what she knew. Just another fun fact, some famous alumni from Haskell. Jim Thorpe, if you've heard of him, he was a famous athlete from the Shawnee, Oklahoma area. And I thought this was kind of ironic because because I work on Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. The base was actually named after an alumni of Haskell, and he was a Army Major General Clarence Tinker. One of the earliest records I found while doing my research, and I will say that this experience has inspired me to continue my research. Plus, we've made a lifelong friend with Ann, so I want to stay in touch with her so we can, find out really if we are true descendants of Chief Kewaskum. But I found this. It's the 1895 Prairie Potawatomi annuity payment roll, and you see the name Kewaskum, a payment of $17.44, which was probably a lot back then, was paid to a 21-year-old male, but there's no first name, so we don't know for sure where that came from. The next chart, it just kind of explains a little bit between the Prairie Band and the Citizen Band, because there are 13 bands of Potawatomis, and Joey and I are enrolled in the Prairie Band Potawatomi tribe, which is based in Kansas. And Joey actually used to work for the Citizen Band, so I think I will turn this over to Joey to talk a little bit about what she knows about the Prairie Band and the Citizen Band.
Well, as for the Prairie Band, actually it ends with us, me and my sister, because they close their rolls at a quarter degree of Indian blood. So we are actually a quarter Prairie Potawatomi and we're a quarter Kickapoo, so we're half altogether as far as the Bureau of Indian Affairs is concerned. So it's sort of a shame that, when you look at on this slide, that the citizen Potawatomis have well over 25,000 members. And honestly, I'm not sure how many the Prairie Band have, but it's probably, I don't even think it's 10,000. So it's very, it's almost like if they don't open their rolls, the tribe is going to die eventually. So that kind of makes me sad, to think about something like that. So I'm hoping that they will open their rolls. The Citizen Potawatomi, actually, you can get what people would call an Indian card if you can just prove your descendancy. So if you could go to the tribal office and produce your lineage, and then they would give you a card that might say, 364th degree of Indian blood. So, but I did work there for 14 years, and I think that as we talk a little bit more about this presentation, and we talked about the fact that our grandmother grew up at Haskell Institute. She was Americanized and was told not to use her language, don't wear your regalia, you're going to be a Baptist churchgoer. So that's how we were raised. She didn't really raise us in that sense. So when I worked for the Citizen Potawatomi, it's really interesting because I feel like that I learned a lot about the Citizen Band while working there, because we didn't learn that from our grandmother. So I am sad when I think back that we could have and we should have really sat our grandma down and said, tell us what it was like when you were growing up, and talk to us more about your experiences, your life experiences. And now our mother's gone, so it just, those stories, if you were at the dance yesterday at the river, and Ronnie shared stories, I really, it just touched me because I really wish that we had those types of stories that we could share with our descendants, my daughters for sure. And they're very much proud of their heritage, even though neither one of them can be on the Potawatomi roll.
So the regalia, as Joy talked about a little bit, it is sacred, and usually it is handmade, the beadwork, the applique, the ribbon. It's all painstakingly handmade, and it's passed down to generation. It's not considered a costume, and it defines that person. I like bright colors, so these are the colors that I selected. It's not necessarily specific to the Potawatomi, but the pattern of the attire is actually Potawatomi, what the women would generally wear during a powwow. And I'm going to let Joey tell the story about how we came to obtain these garments.
So I really love this story because as Ann and I were, and she and I feel like she and I talked a lot before we kind of brought Val into the picture. But we talked about the parade and the presentation that we're giving today. I said, it would be really nice if we could wear Potawatomi regalia because we really want to, represent our tribe, and we want to kind of share a piece of our culture and Chief Kewaskum's heritage with you all, who everyone that we've talked to just seems so proud to be a part of this village, and I think it's wonderful. You don't go everywhere where people say, "Oh, I love my town." Anyway, I'm getting off track. I do that a lot. So. But so I told Ann, I said, I would really, really love to wear some regalia, but we know no one. Again, going back to telling you the story about how we're not really connected culturally with our tribe. And so Ann said, maybe you could give me some pictures and I can see what I can do on my end. And unbeknownst to us, the seamstress that she had in mind was her own mother, Nat. So Nat actually created our apparel today based off of pictures, and then we had to share our measurements. Oh boy, that was like really hard. I was like, did you do that? Anyway.
That was the hardest question I asked you.
What was worse was Ann came back and asked me if this was correct. I'm like, really?
But we were so, I know I speak with Val, we were just so overwhelmed that Nat would sew these for us, and you sent them to us back in, maybe it was May, early May, no?
A couple months ago.
Yeah, so we tried them on, and they had to be tweaked just a tiny bit because, darn it, those measurements were really accurate. So we actually got to meet Nat when we arrived. We met her in Racine and had Culver's, but we didn't actually have any of the custard or the cheese curds. What's wrong with us, right? Anyway, so we owe so much to, Ann has just been like such a godsend. She's just been wonderful through this whole thing.
So we had to research what, you know, why should they. So when we were trying to find out, you know, what kind of outfits, and we were all thinking, you know, all this beadwork, and I know Michelle, this group that was dancing yesterday, I've seen her sewing, and I'm thinking, I don't think my mom wants to do that. You know, it's very intricate, and but these are what people would wear, and like they said, there's pictures that are from like nowadays that, you know, when they have gatherings, and this is very much what people were wearing. So.
Yes. So, kind of pick up where Grandma met our grandfather, Guy Rowdy. And they met, he's a Kickapoo, from the Kickapoo tribe, and they got married in 1937. They only had 2 children, Barbara Jean, who was our mother, and Delbert Jean, our uncle. Both are gone now. And one thing that I wanted to point out was, again, because Grandma and Grandpa were both so, you know, we did not adopt the Indian way of, you know, practicing religion or, you know, worshiping God. They were very instrumental in establishing a Baptist church. And memories from the early days in the church, we used to meet in a brush arbor. We would have services under a brush arbor, and seriously, we had pews and a piano, and we would celebrate in the outdoors. That's where we had Bible school. And eventually, they built a church. Both Grandma and Grandpa were very active in the church, and we were in Bible school. We were in all of the activities. So we were raised and we were in church anytime the door was open. But Grandpa was a deacon and Grandma was the church treasurer. So because Grandma did continue to speak the language, she was a translator and was, you know, always trying to get people to get into church. So the non-English speaking indigenous people that lived in the Shawnee area, she would pick them up for church and take them, and she would translate for them. And I remember there were also some of the natives that did pray in the language when we were having our church services. So they were instrumental in that. And I don't know if that church is actually still active. I think the last date that it was active was probably at least in the 1980s, so it did continue. A little bit about our mother. So she married our father, lived in California. We were both born in Los Angeles, but unfortunately they divorced when we were really young. I think I was probably 3 or 4. Joy may have still just been a baby. But she picked us up and we moved to Shawnee, Oklahoma, and went to live with Grandma and Grandpa. So we were pretty much raised by her through most of our childhood life. Delbert was our uncle. He had 3 sons. Guy Anthony was the oldest, and it was Joey, myself, and Guy Anthony that grew up together. Because his mother abandoned him at a young age. And Delbert was kind of a nomad, so he would come and go. Aaron Lynn, he was born later, and he's now gone, as well as Guy Anthony. And then Stuart, who actually took the middle name Kewaskum, he was born in 1983. Stuart is still around. We don't have any contact with him, regrettably. And he had a son, but he's deceased. So there's not many male descendants left, since it's just Joey and I, and then Stuart is the only remaining male heir. But growing up, Grandma took us everywhere, and I know Mom was probably on some of those trips, but we went. We were always going to some of the local state parks. She would take us on trips, swimming holes. We were always out having fun. And this next chart is actually a picture of the house that my grandma and grandpa built. So it was there before we moved there. They were building it as they were raising their family. We always had pets. We always had a lot of dogs and a lot of cats. We raised roosters and hens. So we always had eggs and, chicken for meals. Grandma raised guineas, and Joey thinks that it was to kind of help alleviate the tick problem. We tended a vegetable garden, so Grandma, because Grandpa died when we were really young, she was pretty self-sufficient, but she would have a garden, and when the harvest was gone, she would have a control burn and burn all the remaining whatever was left, and the next year would have a farmer come out and plow it, and we sow the seeds and then reap the harvest and do it all over again. One thing that she did that I remember fondly, and unfortunately I did not learn any of this from Grandma. I'm a cook, but I didn't learn how to can or raise a vegetable garden. We had a sand plum tree, and we always had fresh plum jelly. So that is something I really miss about Grandma. She did work as a dietitian for Indian Health Service, and she worked in a hospital that was in Claremore, Oklahoma. And from Shawnee to Claremore was a little over 100 miles. But she would make that trip weekly, and she rented a small apartment in Claremore so she could stay there and not have to drive home every day. And she worked there even during the time that my grandfather was sick. But she was a homemaker and a seamstress. She made a lot of our clothing. And she would also make Indian shirts for men if they needed it, doing the ribbon work and such. So she would be called upon to do that. She crocheted and knitted as well, and I know she made a lot of our toys that we had growing up. She was famous for her cinnamon rolls. They were huge. They were probably, she made a huge pan, and everybody loved her cinnamon rolls, and her pie crust was one of the best that I've ever had. Again, I wish I had learned all that. I don't really like to bake because it's so, you have to be so precise on your measurements. So I'm not a fan of yeah. She made candy too. Joy had a memory. I had forgotten about this, but we had a huge cactus plant out in the front yard, and she would make cactus candy. So, and then popcorn balls. She was always making popcorn balls. We never went out for New Year's Eve. We'd stay home and we'd have all kinds of candy and treats. So that was our celebrations.
Yeah, one thing I can remember was we had it was called the Starlight Drive-In Theater in Shawnee, and we would go to the, Grandma would say, let's load up the car, we're gonna go see probably she said moving picture. So we would fill the ice chest full of Shasta Cola, and she would pop popcorn in like a big brown grocery bag, and we would just sit out in the, you'd have to sit, you could sit in your car, but you could also like take lawn chairs and sit outside. That was another really good memory. I just feel like she provided so much fun for us too. And then I don't know, I can't remember if we were going to talk about it on the slide, but the we would have, she would say, okay, everybody get your stick. And she'd build a little bonfire out in the yard, and we would get our hot dogs and put them on the end of the stick, and we'd, roast our wieners on the stick and just eat outside, and we'd catch lightning bugs. It was just like, kids, I feel like kids don't do that nowadays, and I didn't do that with my own, so those days are kind of gone, but anyway.
Yeah, we have our own broth fry.
They don't know what a broad fry is.
Again, she was very self-sufficient because she had to be. I remember when Winter and I, we were coming back from church, and church was probably 15 miles away, and it was Grandma and us 3 kids, and we had a flat, and it was dark, and she got out and changed that flat. It was freezing cold, and she did it. I don't know if I'd be able to change a flat tire. I'd be calling my husband, but she had to do it. So she was self-sufficient. There were times that she would try to make ends meet, so she'd do some house cleaning for a local businesswoman there in Shawnee. But they were friends, so she wanted to help Grandma out, so she'd pay her to clean her house. Working at the Indian Hospital in Claremore, she eventually retired, but she also was a dietitian in the kitchen at the local university in Shawnee, Oklahoma Baptist University. So she would get up, and Joy told me a story of, why don't you tell it? Because I know you tell stories so good about her, didn't you?
So she, I never knew my grandma to ever miss a day of work. I mean, she was always just up and gone. She just had to go to work every day, and definitely didn't complain about any ailments. So the weather was going to be bad overnight, and she was like, I have got to make sure that I can get to work. And Oklahoma Baptist University from her house is, I don't know, maybe 2-3 miles. It's not that far. So she took one of her quilts, and I'm speaking to all Wisconsin people that probably know if you put a blanket on your windshield, guess what happened? Froze on there, could not pull it off. So my grandma, I just can't even imagine. My grandma, gets in the car, she's trying to tug that quilt off the windshield, can't get it off, so she just gets in the car, starts it. I'm sure she had the H on the column, and she's just trying to drive, trying to look through the quilt, but she made it to work. Yeah, she was really well known too for taking us the wrong way down a one-way street. And so riding with my sister here this weekend, I don't even remember what we did, or what she did, because she's behind the wheel, right? My grandma used to like to say "yaw" if she messed up something, So my sister, I don't remember what you did.
I hit the curb at Sally's. Oh, I hit the rocks.
The rocks. So we both said, "Yaw!" That was really a yaw moment. Yeah, that was really
Again, we did not adopt the Indian way of lifestyle, even though there were times that we would go to powwows, I know Grandma would dance at the powwows. She had a shawl, my mom had a shawl, but she did assist if somebody lost a family member and they needed an Indian shirt, because the Indian way, what they do is there's no embalmment of the body. They take the body, they sit up with it all night, which is similar to a wake, and all the women cook and prepare food for the family. They sit with the body, they clothe it with, an Indian shirt. There has to be an eagle feather in the casket, also tobacco for the person, and they send them on their journey to the Creator. But Grandma wasn't buried that way. We had a funeral, with the funeral home, and Joey reminded me that when they were getting ready to, lower her into the family cemetery, which we have on our family property, they wanted to put some sage or tobacco in the casket, but Mom said, please don't do that. Grandma wouldn't have wanted that. So she was very, very, Christian lifestyle, God-fearing woman. And so we did not learn a lot about the tribal ways. And I kind of wish we had, but that is slowly dying out. And the Potawatomi language or the Algonquin language, the elders know it, and I think they're trying to teach it to, the children. So we hope it doesn't go away. I think.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that the plant, the tree here is sumac. And I don't know if this type of tree grows here in Wisconsin, but, okay. So, our mother had told me before she passed that our grandmother was raised by her aunt, who I believe was a medicine woman. And so she actually taught my grandmother at a young age, maybe perhaps before she went to Haskell, about plants and herbs and such. So Val and I have memories of being in the car with Grandma, whether it was, coming home from church or going to church or going wherever, and we would go down these, dusty dirt roads, and Grandma would see a sumac tree, and we'd pull over and she'd gather it. But I never knew, what is she doing that for? But, what is she how is she preparing that? I personally don't remember having anything medicinal like that, but do you?
I think I tasted sumac tea one time, but I don't know what it was used for. I think I read that it might be for, inflammation in the body. But she would stop and gather it and boil it and make a tea and drink it. Some of the fondest memories I have are of fry bread and corn soup. And there's actually a restaurant that is run by the Citizen Band in Shawnee, and it's called Fry Bread Taco. So, Indian tacos are very popular, so they sell those, but they also make and sell corn soup. So when I get the hankering, I will go to Shawnee and get some corn soup and fry bread. It's not often, but it's really, really good. But that is something that I remember, and something that they would prepare at the gatherings, the powwows, and so I just wanted to throw that in there because that was something that Grandma made, and I've never cooked it myself, and I never really got on to making fry bread either, unfortunately. The last chart, about the time that Ancestry.com came out with their DNA test, will tell you where you're from. I decided to do it, so I did. And even though it's kind of ever evolving, and they can dig in deeper into where you are from, this chart actually is as of current, and 77% total is from indigenous America, both North and Mexico. Our father was Mexican, and I've started researching the Lascano side of the family and found that they actually came from Mexico, or my grandfather did. my paternal grandfather. But you can also see that there are small percentages from Africa, Spain, France, Scotland, Portugal, Senegal, and Ireland. So we're a mix of a little bit of everything, but again, the majority is Indigenous America. So I thought that was just something fun I put in there for y'all to see. And that's me and Joey as we were growing up in my grandpa's truck in the background.
And so now we thought we'd open it up to questions, if anyone has any questions.
Any questions?
I see a lot of hands.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I was curious, you said your grandmother learned at Haskell. Was that just the best place for her to get an education, or a place where she could get an education, or do you know why she attended?
You know, I honestly, I don't know how she wound up at Haskell. I'm sure a lot of you have seen things recently in the news about some terrible things that have happened at these Indigenous schools and deaths that have occurred that were not reported. I believe it was it was the late 80s. My mother and I, from Oklahoma, we drove her mother, my grandma, to Mayetta, Kansas, where the Prairie Potawatomi tribe is located. So on the way, we stopped at Haskell, and I had mentioned this to Ann that when we got to that campus, which it is still there, it's still a school. It's like I believe, as long as you can prove that you're Native American, they'll give you a free education there. But my grandmother she just fluttered like a butterfly around that whole entire campus. She didn't make me think in any way that she had a terrible time there. But, you know, unfortunately, never asked her, you know, like, how did you end up there, Grandma? Was that, you know, did your parents at the time think that, you know, that you needed to go there, or was she taken by, you know, government officials and said, you know, I mean, because honestly, when you think about it, would you want your child taken somewhere where they were basically told not to do certain things anymore, or live the type of upbringing that they were, you know, used to? So, you know, I kind of feel like maybe it was not her will to go, but I think she made the best of it, and I think she really had very fond memories of that education.
And we also talked about that, we're not sure what year she started there, or by the time she graduated, she was, you know, like, it was college age, so.
Is the chief's name translated differently in English? Or is there a different meaning for Chief Kewaskum?
There are a lot of meanings for Kewaskum. The one that we like the best is his tracks lead home. What was it? On the back of this really great book.
Which are for sale right outside.
His tracks are homeward. But a lot of the translations are turning back or going, it seems to be like turning around or coming home. It seems to be the main gist of most of the definitions that we found.
Thank you.
Raise your hand, please.
Hi there. I also want to thank you for being here. And I don't know if this probably isn't the greatest question, but it's kind of sitting on my heart right now. So our school teams are the Kewaskum Indians. And what I really want to ask you is, we want to be able to honor that heritage. Is it appropriate to fight to keep that kind of a name? Because my concern, granted, this isn't my heritage, if we let the Indian name go, we allow the Americanization to continue, and we allow the marginalization of the Native Americans to continue. So I was really interested in your opinion, and I just really want to thank you again for being here.
So we talked about that a little bit. So we grew up in Tecumseh, and we were the Tecumseh Savages. That was our mascot. That hasn't changed, and I'm of the opinion that it needs to stay that way. My husband I'm very proud of the emblem, and I saw the Kewaskum, the plaque over here with the Indian head. My husband, huge Redskins fan, Washington, and when we found out they were changing the name, I was really disappointed because I thought, the logo, the mascot that's what it represents, and you change it and it's just like not the same anymore, and I think you lose some of the fandom from it. But yeah, definitely, I am not a proponent of changing the Atlanta Braves or the Tecumseh Savages. I'm for keeping those names because I'm proud of my heritage, and I don't find that derogatory.
No, actually, I just wanted to add that I feel like it speaks to maybe the type of person in that you're a savage, so you're fierce, you're strong, you're mighty. I don't find it derogatory either.
And I wanted to add to that one too. We just finished working on the museum, which opened, and I worked on the Native American display, and I talked with several people to figure out how to do that display and have things in there. And one of the archaeologists said in a number of museums, they are getting rid of that entire section because this picture or that picture might be offensive. But then how do you remember anything? Because, just about anything can be offensive at some point. I know I have a tiny bit of Native American in me. I think it's, probably a 16th or something, not very much, but I don't know any of the stories. I don't know any of my background because when my family, at that time it was not a good thing to be Native American, so we're French.
So are we.
I was wondering, what is a powwow?
So I think my interpretation of a powwow would be it's ceremonial. It's a time where I'm going to just kind of talk about what Ronnie said yesterday, which was so interesting. I loved the way he referenced the drum, and usually the drums are pretty large, and there's maybe 6 or 8 men that are around it, and they traditionally make the drum themselves from a hide, and they all have their drumstick. But Ronnie said that it was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and I was like, wow, that is so deep. It's just, I love that. And then referred to the tall grass that they would, kind of stomp down as that's Mother Earth's hair. And I'm going to look at things a lot different now that, oh gosh, I just have been sitting here talking. I forgot what the question was. Oh, yeah.
I think you just had one.
But it's very ceremonial, and so it can be just tribal or it can be intertribal. And so a lot of people would just gather, and sometimes at powwows they have several drums, so they'll take turns singing. Each drum will take its turn. And it's sacred because they go in to, when you enter, you go in, and it's always clockwise. So you enter to the left and you circle and you come out that same way. So the circle is something that's very important, and you dance in a circle. All dances are done in a circle. I hope that answers your question.
I'm glad that you asked that question too. I'm wondering if, is that we talked a lot, we all like to talk. And as we were wondering, talking about like what is offensive and what is not, and I'm wondering if Bill can share your.
So, working in management, and something that does rub me the wrong way is when I hear somebody say, well, we really need to circle the wagons on that. Yeah, that's not bad. It's like Indians circling your wagons, they're gonna attack. Or, instead of, hey, we need to have a meeting on that, we need to have a powwow on that. That's something that I would prefer they not use, because like Joy said, a powwow is a sacred gathering. They're celebrating, celebrating Mother Earth, the Creator. So those are the kinds of terms that really turn me off.
More questions?
Any idea how many Potawatomi were forced to go through the reservation, and were they part of that whole Trail of Tears?
So I think it was the Trail of Death was the one that the Potawatomi people were in.
Right, the Trail of Death was, again, doing my research, 61 miles and actually 600 miles in 61 days. And during that time when the Potawatomis were forced from the Great Lakes area and then down into Kansas through, the western, forced west through those states, about 40 people died on that trail. And I did learn that some of that trail is marked. So I intend to do more research and learn more about what happened. Joey, working for the Citizen Band, they have a published paper that comes out every month. And she found some records from, was it 1987-ish? And there's actually some letters that were printed from soldiers that were on that trail, and they gave reports to their superiors of, the day we had an Indian fall sick, so we had to stop here in camp for 2 days, and we can't leave until he's better, etc. So things like that we're still looking into, but it was definitely the Potawatomis that were on the Trail of Death.
Any idea how many Potawatomi were forced out of this area?
Yeah, how many?
How many?
I have read that number, and I don't remember it off. It was a lot, so I'll have to look that up and let you know.
Thank you for being here as well. It's been just a joy seeing you here. Prior to Ann contacting you, had you had anything in your life that would have brought you to this direction, to Wisconsin to check out your heritage, or was Ann the first?
Yes, we had.
And I'd like to know how you feel about finding out.
So we had absolutely no idea that there was a Village of Kewaskum. It blows me away just to see that name. I had to take pictures of, you know, the big green state sign that says Kewaskum. That is just incredible. And then to see the shirts with people that say Kewaskum, I mean, it's incredible. But yeah, no, we had no idea until Ann reached out. So, and that was just, I can still hear she probably was just about to cry when I answered the
really
phone.
excited.
So, you know,
And I told her everyone was going to be very excited, and I don't think she believed me until she got it.
No, you all have just made our stay here so warm and welcoming, and by saying that, you know, you were excited to come and see us today, it's unreal. It's an experience that I've never ever had in my life. I'm sure my sister can say the same way, and it's just thank you all so much for being here in this room with us today to listen to, you know, our lives, and we're just happy to share that with you all.
Any other questions?
Are there any Potawatomis in the audience today?
Hi, the question is for you, Joey. I guess Shasta is like a native thing because I grew up drinking it. So what is your favorite?
I love Shasta Cola. Just the cola, you know, the Coke brand, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Can you even get Shastas anywhere?
In California.
Okay. Yeah, my sister can still drink Shasta. In Boston, I guess maybe it's a New England thing. It's seltzer water.
I also want to thank you both for being here. It's a pleasure on my part. I keep hearing Potawatomi and Algonquin in the same sentence. What does that mean? Is one a language? Is one a language? Is one a tribe? Is one a group, or what?
I think it's the language. When we were talking with Ann, you know, we always said grandma's speaking Kickapoo. But the language, Algonquin language, is used by a number of different tribes. So I think it's probably maybe like the dialect, but that's what it's referred to as Algonquin.
And sometimes they'll say Algonquin people, but that's people who speak that language, I believe.
Anyone else?
So,
I think that closes the questions.
well, thank you very much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to Joey and Val.